Hello out there, you guys, for an exciting series of discussions taking the Boston Globe's award-winning journalism beyond the page. Now, my name is Hiawatha Bray, and you've had to put up with it for a long time. I've been writing about technology for the Globe for over 2 decades. I'm going to be moderating today's presentation, which is about the whole issue of navigating the shift to electric vehicles, a shift that seems to be well underway. But how well? That's what we're going to be talking about today with a couple of people who know all about it. They're sort of on the pointy end. These are the people who are at the business end of selling us cars. And we figure they can give us some really useful perspective. We've got Guy Bedeau. I did pronounce it right, didn't I?
You nailed it.
There you go. Guy Bedeau, who is the electric vehicle ambassador at Milford Nissan in Milford. So he actually sells these things. And of course, we have Robert you told me how to say it.
Okoneski.
Okoneski. Robert Okoneski.
Polish power.
Polish power. And Ukrainian as well.
And Ukrainian as well.
Absolutely. He is the general counsel of the Massachusetts State Automobile Dealers Association. And the
executive vice president.
And the executive vice president as well. So we're very happy.
And I can take the trash out too.
Oh, there you go. Absolutely. We're really glad you could come and talk to us about this. I want to start out by asking, are we in the best of times for the EV market or the worst of times? On the one hand, you have Cox Automotive saying that these things are starting to pile up on dealer lots. Last month they said that there's like 103-day inventory in car dealerships all over America, which is like double the inventory of gas-powered cars, which suggests that a lot more of these things are being built than people want to buy. But then you look at the sales numbers, and they're selling like wildfire. 300,000 electric cars were sold in the second quarter, and the same organization says we're going to sell over 1 million of these cars this year. Why is there such a seeming contradiction there? Piling up on lots while people are still buying lots of them. What's going on? Would you care to tackle that, Mr. Bedeau?
Sure. I would say that the amount of inventory is really the least interesting number of what you said, that the concrete number is the rate of increase of adoption and the sheer number of people who are choosing to lease or purchase an electric vehicle, many of them for the very first time in their lives. So the fact that the factories built even more of this model or that paint color of that model that is not as popular as the other versions doesn't strike me as that important.
But does it possibly suggest that the automakers are, if anything, being too aggressive given the current level of demand for these cars? That, yes, there are still plenty of people out there wanting to buy them, but maybe not quite enough to justify the current plans for production?
There is definitely continued work to be done as far as matching what the factories are building and the variety of offerings, the price point of those offerings compared to what would best facilitate adoption. I would agree. I mean, there's no $20,000 pure electric car. There's no $30,000 pure electric car yet. There are several coming. Actually, I take that back. We have a car, I misspoke, we have a car, the MSRP is $29,000, and it's the Nissan Leaf hatchback, 150 miles range, tried and true, and I've sold hundreds of them.
Yeah, but isn't that one of the cars that is not eligible for the...
It is no longer eligible,
right.
Which is ironic. That goes to, Senator Manchin and the details of how the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, got passed last year, because it's made in Tennessee, the car is made in Tennessee, the battery pack is assembled in Tennessee, but the ingredients aren't mined in North America or a friendly country, so apparently it no longer qualifies, but for years it did qualify for the full $7,500 federal support, plus now $3,500 of Massachusetts support.
Right.
So sure, I wish it still qualified, of course.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Robert about that. I'm going to go with Robert because that way I think I'm on safer ground.
Which, as you know, I'll answer to anything.
But of course, it sounds like what we've got here in the federal policy toward EVs is like this sort of mixed bag of incentives. They're definitely trying to push us toward electric cars, but they are also playing an economic warfare game with China in the middle of all this. And it sometimes seems as though these two goals almost conflict with one another. If you were really trying to get these EVs out there as fast as possible, you want to encourage people to buy things like the Nissan Leaf, and you'd offer incentives on that. But instead, they also want to bring as much of that industry as possible into the United States. Do you see this as a policy that can work over the long term?
Well, first off, having just spent a week in Washington lobbying on a bunch of issues, there's no way I will ever do a mind meld with them and figure out what it is they're actually trying to do. But what they have done is try to craft, recognizing the extreme price differences between an EV and a comparable ICE vehicle. They have crafted these tax credits to encourage people to get into it. Now, you know, as Guy said, the Manchin threw in there the whole qualifications on the battery minerals, sourcing, the construction, et cetera, right, in order to get the 7,500. If you look at the list today, I believe there's probably around 24 vehicles that actually qualify for the full 7,500 under those standards, right? So there is a start towards the transition to at least a recognition of the credits going towards the higher prices. But at the same time, you can buy an EV of any type that you want, if it's available. People get mixed up. I think they get trapped in this discussion of the credits and the state rebate versus what's available and what you need. When you look at the state numbers under the More EV program, when you look at the federal numbers on sales, there's a considerable amount of the EVs, the low emission vehicles also are plug-in hybrids of some degree. Now, when you look at our legislature, they took out the hybrids as part of our More EV program. So you cannot get the 3,500 towards a hybrid. The feds, on the other hand, have made a full-on endorsement of the hybrids. And we've always argued that the hybrids are a great vehicle for the consumer to transition to get comfortable with the sense of an EV, to get a sense of what the charging might be, your needs, especially on what type of travel you do. If you're just going back and forth every day, 20 miles round trip, EVs would make great sense. But if you do a lot of long travel, it's difficult absent some sort of expanded charging infrastructure to have that confidence that going from point A to B to C is going to work for you. So there's, I've said this to you before, you've got to look at this. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you really have to look at it as that 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle where when you buy it, you dump it all on the table, you flip the pieces over, you start putting the pieces together that fit. And that's where we're at. We're at the stage of dumping pieces on the table, flipping them over, and starting to make them fit. At some point, we'll get the puzzle together, but it's going to take time. Yeah,
but you get the impression that there are so many moving parts here that are partly placed in this whole program for political or economic reasons as opposed to like this environmental decision that they're making. Like, for example, the California standards, which we in Massachusetts are going to meet, where you're going to say that 20% of the cars will be able to be sold by 2035 can be plug-in hybrids, as opposed to, like as you just said, here in Massachusetts, we're no longer going to have any kind of benefits for people who buy plug-in hybrids.
Well, you get the benefit from buying the plug-in hybrid. Right. You're just not getting the 3,500.
Right, you're not getting the 3,500.
Right, but when you look at it, there are 14 states or so, depending on how they've added themselves into the whole CARB standard.
It's 18 actually.
Yeah, but some of them they're not kicking in until 2025. Right. So looking at it today.
Right.
You look at the CARB states, and it's about 40% of the overall car sales in the country, which is pretty substantial.
Yes, it is.
You look at California, every vehicle that's being purchased in California, 1 out of 4 qualifies as an EV, or a zero emission vehicle, if you will. You look at here, the number of vehicles over the last quarter or two has increased enormously, in terms of, to the point where about 20% of the sales now are in that ZEV category, whether it's a full-on electric or a plug-in. And so you're getting there, right? People are recognizing the fact that they can buy vehicles that are not dependent on going to a gas station, that are better for the environment in their minds, and they're moving in that direction. But it's going to take time. People need to get comfortable with new things, and it's like anything else. It's people need to be acclimated to it. They need to be introduced to it. They need to be comfortable with it. And changing the mindset of just going to a dealership, buying what looks good or what you need, and then making that weekly trip to the gas station. If it's a weekly, maybe it's every other day or whatever. It takes time to get to that.
But it's interesting that even despite all this and even the growing sales, there's this statistic out from the U.S. Energy Information Service where they are actually predicting that you're still only going to see about 1/3 of all cars sold being electric as far out as 2050. They're saying that despite everything we've seen so far, most people are going to keep right on buying basically
Sure.
ICE cars, internal combustion cars. Do you think that's realistic? Even I look at that and think that seems a bit low to me, but that's what they're predicting.
Well, I would just add this, and I don't want to hog up all the time here, but statistically speaking, you threw out a figure there of 300,000 EV sales,
Right.
And I would just submit to you that's a national number,
Right.
We sell on average about 300,000 new vehicles in Massachusetts a year, right? And so when you look at the CARB states that are in play, they represent 40% of car sales right now. So any type of commitment within those CARB sales towards EVs, it's going to boost that EV number. But as a CARB state in Massachusetts, we've been committed to the CARB requirements since 1995. I believe New York started in 93. There's been a number of states that have added on after that. And when you look at, we have to commit to 100% EV sales by 2035. The EPA just came out with a proposed rulemaking to get everyone in the country, get the manufacturers committed to all car sales in the country to, I think, 67.5 in EV sales by 2033. So you can't conflate, what Massachusetts and the CARB states are committed to. They're all in on getting to 100% by 2035 when you have these other 35 or so states that are muddling along trying to figure out what to do, and the EPA is trying to push the manufacturers really in the direction of what the CARB states are doing.
But how is that going to affect you, Mr. Badu? I mean, you're trying to figure out how to meet the needs of the people who actually come into the dealership, and I assume there are still going to be people for years to come who are just not going to be satisfied with the electric option. How do you persuade them, or do we give up on them and basically say, look, we've got to make a provision for people who want to keep driving ICE cars?
Well, I was sitting here listening to the previous topic, and my mind went actually to the improvement. Sorry, this does relate, I think, to tobacco sales, right? The sort of general presumption, we want to reduce the amount of smoking that people do. We want to make it harder to do. We want to reduce secondhand smoke. Well, I'm old enough, I think we're old enough, most of the audience is not probably old enough to remember when you could, there was a smoking section in planes. That was normal. That was given. It had always been that way.
They had ashtrays in
Yes, they had ashtrays in cars that got used typically, right? I'm old enough, I remember when I was in the 60s, that if you were in a friend's car, 9 out of 10 times, the seatbelt was tucked into the seat cover because nobody used them. My family did, but we were the weirdos. We were the safety nuts just using a seatbelt, right? So it's, whether it's, and now it's like smoking in a taxi, smoking in a plane. Of course you don't. God, that was dinosaur time. Well, we've lived through this type of adoption curve over and over. And we're on the far end of both of those, and we're in the middle of the electric one. So back to your question, I would say my first role, my first duty in my role is to see if I can match a product for what the person actually wants. And will I introduce an electric car, the idea of an electric car to somebody who didn't walk in for one? Yes, I am beginning to do that because, again, my primary focus is to do right by the consumer as best as I can.
You told me that anecdote about the customer who
yes,
came in
I mean,
expecting,
just last week, 2 weeks ago, I had a gentleman come in. He was used to a V6 gasoline crossover, all-wheel drive car, very nice car, SL, with leather, moonroof, all the rest. The problem was he was leasing it, and it was from 3 years ago when there was no demand. The vaccine wasn't out yet, maximum inventory, and so factories were throwing money at people to move cars, help dealers move cars. So he got used to a payment, $400-something payment on a really nice car. He comes back in, all he wants is the same car again. And I had to tell him, well, that exact same car, pretty much, in 2023, is almost double that lease. And he went, well, that's a non-starter. I'm not going to pay $700-800 for a car payment. I mean, that's crazy. I said, well, I understand. I wouldn't really either. But what I'm hearing is that you've got the car you've been in fits your needs really well. You like the size, you like the power, you like the appointment, the features, the leather, etc. I have another car that offers all of that would be less money. It's that car right there. And I pointed in the showroom, and it was our pure electric Aria, all-wheel drive Aria crossover. And he's looking at us like, yeah, but I don't want an electric car. So I think the mistake people make is I could have gone, yeah, you're right, you should though, right? You dope. Let me enlighten you, right? And that's when I think the conversation about adoption goes off the rails or is not helped, because then you get well-meaning people trying to enlighten people who love their gasoline cars rather than persuading them that maybe the existing happens to be pure electric car is a car they would want anyway, separate from any federal or state support anyway. So it's like, well, it's right there. Why don't you see if see if it's big enough for you? And it's like, he's looking at it, gets inside, and oh, it is kind of nice. And it's the most advanced car that we make. It's actually an Infiniti, so it's at top level, but it's priced in a middle level. And he's like, I'm kind of surprised. And it's very sleek inside, and the doors are very solid. There's engineering I could go into. And so, okay, I'll have to think about this. And then he's an engineer. He starts asking questions. And because I have 11 years experience working with electric vehicles and driving them myself, I had the answers to all his questions. And this is a second pothole that EV adoption runs into, is where does a consumer who just is kind of curious, where do you go to find someone who knows what the heck they're talking about without being a car salesman, like it's, emblazoned across my forehead? I don't care. You just got to buy something I've got today. That's all I really want to do. That's not what I want to do, or my dealership, and there are others too. But to get adoption rates even higher, there needs to be more of me, because I was able to present, it's like, forget that it's electric. You don't have to care about the environment, to be blunt about it. You're driving a V6 gasoline car, it gets 21 miles a gallon. I got it. It's not in the list of your priorities, but you know the vehicle you want. It's got to go far enough. You got to like yourself driving it. Like, you got to like the look of it sitting in your driveway also. And the financials have to make sense. And when I finally persuaded him to actually drive the thing, he was sold. And the payment was about halfway between his old V6 gasoline payment and the new V6 gasoline payment, partly because of the support now from the mass rebate program that we can capture at the point of sale. So he doesn't have to come up with that money in order to lower his payments down. We can do that for him, and then we get paid back by the state. So that's an innovation. That's only been in place about 3 weeks. And I've been, again, doing this 11 years. So I remember when the More EV and the Mass EV EVIP grants came out, we are absolutely at the best of times in that sense right now.
I want to ask Robert, are you seeing the same sort of thing?
So what Guy forgot to mention is when you buy that Aria, you get a box set of German and Italian opera as well. Your choice.
Well, that would be a great selling point for me. I'm an opera fan.
Which is even better.
Yeah. Any Donizetti in there? No. But is this the sort of thing you're hearing from other dealers in your association, that you're starting to see more and more people interested in electric cars, not because of environmental concerns, not because of the tax benefits, but because they just are learning to like electric cars and they just think they're cool?
Well, I say all the time to reporters, legislators, consumer groups, that the consumer has to help themselves immediately by doing the homework ahead of time. Right? What is it you need? Right? Certainly if you have a family of 5, you're not going to go out and buy a Corvette. Right? You're just not. Doesn't make any sense.
Unless you can't stand your family.
Well, that's a whole different topic, and that's why there's family law courts. But the consumer really can help themselves by figuring out their financing ahead of time. What is they can afford? What is that they need? What's available? And all the dealerships have websites with inventory and pricing tools to help you on that. The manufacturers have pricing tools and inventory tools to help you on that. So that's really the first step. Guy touched upon a point that, frankly, some dealerships across the country have been slow in the uptake, is having sales folks available in the dealership who are up to speed on the capabilities of the EVs that manufacturer is selling through that franchise dealership, right? And so the manufacturers have ramped up training for sales folks. The dealers have ramped up training for sales folks. We're working with a group called Plug in America that does training for dealership personnel to help push the EV education on the sales folks and the consumers. It's a joint effort. And that's really an important piece of it. If someone is going in expecting the dealer to do all the work for them, well, it's not going to happen. It's just not. The consumer really needs to help themselves first.
Right. But I did like the way Guy's point came across to me, which is the idea that first and foremost, you're supposed to be selling somebody something they want. And you're not supposed to be worried primarily about convincing them. It's not an eat your vegetables, this is good for the world kind of deal.
Yeah. We're not finger pointing or being evangelists, because as soon as someone, as consumers, we don't want that. And
No,
we're shopping for a camera, a phone, or a refrigerator. We don't want to be told we should want something else. It's not the place to start at all.
No, I think that's a really very good point. But I am interested. You were talking about this whole training thing, because I've written about this. How do you get these vehicles maintained? I mean, we're still building out that aspect of the whole workflow, because there are apparently not very many technicians in the United States who are currently up to speed on fixing and maintaining electric cars. And that's one thing you don't think about necessarily when you buy a car. You buy any other kind of car, you go, I can always get it fixed at the dealership, or I can always get it fixed at countless.
Well, if you're buying a vehicle at a dealership, you're going to have the commitment of that dealer and the franchise backing that dealer, that the tech is going to have the training and have the wherewithal to be able to diagnose and repair a problem with that vehicle.
By the way, do they? Because I remember talking to Nissan, and you were talking about the Aria here. They themselves were saying, look, we're going to have to train everybody who's going to be carrying this car. I think there are.
Well, just like it's when Ford transitioned to the all aluminum F-150.
Right.
There was considerable training that the dealers had to go through for their personnel to be able to address a problem with the aluminum F-150. The dealerships had to buy an incredible amount of new equipment because now you're dealing with an entirely different vehicle than what you had with the prior F-150. So those transitions happen. They take place. They're going to continue to take place. And I would submit to you that a franchise system where you have trained techs at dealerships committed to that is a lot better off than some of these other startups that are out there who don't have that commitment through a dealership network.
Yeah, but it does mean, and I hear what you're saying, but it does mean that the options for having cars repaired and maintained are going to be somewhat smaller at first, because outside of that dealership network, you're going to find it very difficult to find.
But on the other hand, to chime in, electric vehicles are the most, they're just plain way more reliable. There's much less maintaining, quote unquote, maintaining on an electric vehicle to keep it running over the course of the year than any gasoline car. I run into this all the time. People go, oh, what do I need to do? It's like, well, to be honest, rotate the tires as you would anyway. If it has a cabin air filter, change it like you would anyway, and that's it.
Yeah, you get the
what?
impression.
I said, yeah, well, there's no exhaust, there's no muffler, there's no starter, there's no alternator, there's no timing belts or timing chains, no oil to change, no oil filter for the oil, there's no accessory belts, there's no engine air filter, there's none. It has 2/3 the parts of the cars that we all consider to be normal, and we just have had to, live with. Oh, well, if I have an older car, maybe the thing won't start. And, call AAA, go to my local guy. Okay, fine. But if it's an electric car, probably. You just goes and runs. It's a non-issue.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is going to pose a challenge to a whole bunch of different ecosystems. I hadn't thought about the AAA part. Are we going to need AAA roadside assistance? I'm sure we will, but it's going to be a much different picture than we're used to seeing, and they're going to be carrying around batteries. We wanted to have them here. There's this guy in the Boston area who started a company called Spark Charge, and he's working with AAA, and they carry batteries around for electric cars. And you pull up next to the electric car that's run out of power, and that's what AAA is going to be doing from now on, mobile battery charging. But it's also, of course, causing a problem for the manufacturers that we're seeing right now in terms of this auto strike and concerns among auto workers that this whole thing's going to make their lives a lot different. Ford has said they think they may need 40% fewer workers in a world where all the cars are electric. So what does that do, frankly, what does it do to the American middle class? What does it do to people who are used to working in the auto industry if this ends up having such a significant effect on labor in that business?
Well, I think you're going to see that somewhat resolved, a piece of it, based on this strike. I mean, that's really what they're striking for. I've said this for a couple of weeks now. They're really striking for their survivability, not only as a union, but also as a livelihood for a large segment of the population. We're talking, 140,000 UAW workers at the big three.
Right.
Now, when you look at the international nameplate manufacturers that have a substantial footprint in this country, they are not union shops. So we're talking a small subset of workers in the country who are union-based, working at the big three, that have some serious concerns going back to the pre-bankruptcies
Well, yeah, but wait a minute.
on what their survival rate is going to be.
I hear what you're saying, but you're talking about, we only have to think about the union ones, like you said very correctly.
No, you raised the strike, but this is what they're striking about.
You're absolutely
is
right.
their survivability.
But we have, I don't know what the numbers are, but a huge percentage of American auto workers are not unionized anymore.
Correct.
And they are going to be basically defenseless in the face of this. And so it is going to raise some really interesting
Some would
problems
argue
about
that
them.
they've been defenseless.
Yeah, right, exactly, that they have been defenseless. So can we expect to see...
But I would add that to whether it's a union shop or not is not up to the company. It's federal law. So if you're talking the plants in Tennessee, Kentucky, the Carolinas, Bama, et cetera, it's up to those workers to decide for themselves if they want to unionize or not. And to date, they haven't.
So how do you see this shaking out in terms of what the auto industry in America is going to look like in 20 years if we're all building mostly electric vehicles?
Well, certainly from the perspective of Massachusetts and the other CARB states, we're committed to a 100% EV sales by 2035. Absent some sort of extraordinary event that changes that, that's what's in place. Now, what happens with the EPA rulemaking and where the other 35 states or so, that's, I don't have that crystal ball. But certainly, we are committed to it regulatorily. We're committed to it statutorily in Massachusetts, and the legislature reaffirmed that last year. And at the same time, as we've discussed here, they've created these more EV rebates, not only for new vehicles with a MSRP of $55,000 and less. They also have a low-income $1,500 add-on. They also have a new program now for used vehicles.
That's right.
So the legislature has signified its commitment to trying to get the consumer into this marketplace for EVs by backing it with these rebates. You go out here and there's no chargers out here. I've said for 3-4 years now that if we're really going this EV route, we really need a bigger focus on the charging infrastructure. Once people can be more comfortable with finding a place to charge their vehicle, I would submit to you that instead of giving me $3,500 for a rebate on my car purchase, give me the $3,500 towards a level 3 charger at my house.
Oh, come on, a level 3 charger costs a lot more than that.
Well, I'm just saying,
240 volt,
I'm
but
just
still.
saying you got 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, a level 2.
I think that's in
yeah,
place.
Sure, that's
even
more than enough for level 2.
Level 2 is more than enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's not that option, right? I would still have to work with the utility. I would still have to explore the opportunity to get a level 2 charger in my house.
Right.
But to me, if the Commonwealth made more of a commitment to a charging infrastructure, they are doing it. They've taken federal money. They've got a task force. They're doing all this stuff. But in order to get the consumer, you go to Dorchester, go to Roxbury. I've talked to intercity legislators. I'm in Lawrence. We're all triple deckers. Those workers depend on a vehicle to get to a job if they're not taking the bus or the subway. And so where are we going to put the chargers that are necessary in a very congested, just go over to Somerville, Cambridge. We're talking a lot of congestion and very little charging right now. And all those workers who want to get to a job and need to get a job, are going to be dependent on some form of charging in the future. And there really has to be a more comprehensive discussion on that.
I keep waiting for somebody to answer the question, and maybe Guy can answer this. I don't feel entirely, let's put it this way, I can't quite believe that we are going to actually end up with nobody buying gasoline-powered cars in 2035. Maybe they won't be able to buy them in the state of Massachusetts, but I suspect people will simply go to other states to buy them, because I just can't quite believe that demand will completely evaporate in so short a time. Am I wrong about that?
I don't know. I mean, 12 years in this business, given the rate of change of battery technology, of startup companies coming into the market, a couple of Chinese companies, and the question is, are they going to break in successfully to the U.S. market or not? And there's economic issues around that. There's political, international political issues around that. It's still legal to buy tobacco, right? You have to be a certain age. You pay more than you had to before, but if you want to smoke, you can still smoke, right? They're not making smoking illegal in 2035. So we've never really tried this exactly. They didn't make horse and buggies illegal when the automobile was, after Ford did the assembly, adoption of cars went through the roof in the early part of the last century. We didn't make it illegal. We didn't make the status quo illegal the way that we are looking to do for gasoline cars. So it's a good question.
Well, it's not strictly illegal. I assume you would be able to go to a state that isn't one of the CARB states and just go buy a car and drive it back.
Well, that's a good, now
and I think a lot of people will, quite frankly.
They could, and that...
Good luck.
Then, but to go back a step, my understanding is that there actually is Massachusetts grant support. There certainly is grant support for workplace charging to defray the cost to have workplaces install level 2 240 volt, which is really mostly what consumers need. The level 3 or DC fastest charging are great, but that's mostly for point-to-point travel or interstate travel, because what I run into time and time and time again is before a person has gotten their first EV ever, their question is, okay, how expensive it is, how far can it go, where do I refuel, recharge, and how long does it take to recharge? Those are their first 4 questions. And if they take the leap and actually now get an electric car and are living with it, all 4 of those questions go away. They vanish for most people, because what they realize is oh, I can charge at work. I can charge at home. And yes, there's $400, $1,500 initial outlay depending on the house. And there are certainly certain sorts of neighborhoods, like I used to live in Cambridge and Medford, triple deckers also. It's definitely more of a challenge in that setting. It's not impossible, but it's more of a challenge. But when you are able to have level 2 charging at home, what you do is you drive during the day, you discover, whatever the range is on my car, I'm only actually driving 30 or 60 or 90 miles. Right, back when I started, the maximum range of the Nissan Leaf was 74 miles and the thing stopped dead. So now we're kind of it doesn't go 400 miles yet. It's holy smoke. And back in 2012, there was 0 public charging. And now the question is, there's not enough. Or there's not a good enough app on my phone to find the map. There's PlugShare as a map of all the public charging in the United States, into Canada, into Mexico. It's in your pocket where to charge. You don't have to look for a sign on the street.
Oh dear.
So people charge at home, they wake up the next morning a full tank of fuel. The whole question largely evaporates.
And I would just submit to you, Hiawatha, that I'm a very patient person. I don't get all this immediacy that everyone's into culturally these days, right? When you look at what we have to hit with the CARB standards, there's percentages, benchmarks over the years. CARB is going to see how close they are to it or not. And in California, it's been more of a cultural commitment to EVs than we've seen elsewhere. So they'll probably be able to hit their numbers fairly certainly, right? Where the question's going to be in play is how the other states meet those numbers. And I submitted comments to the CARB rulemaking last year, simply asking for some sort of halfway review process to see where we are, not only with CARB, but also how the other states are adopting to CARB, right? Because if CARB is close to the 100 by 2035, we may be stuck at 80 or 65 or some number in between, right? We may not be close to that 100. How is that going to play out? I don't have a crystal ball for you here today, but certainly as a patient person, I think you need to let the marketplace also have a role here.
Will they allow the marketplace to have a role here? If, you know, they in 2034, say 25% of the cars people buy are gasoline powered, clearly demonstrating that there's still a demand for them, will your members be allowed to keep right on selling gas?
That's to be seen how this plays out. But I would also submit to you that if you recall a couple months ago, Stellantis, who has Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, put out a notice that if they want to meet this CARB standard, it's going to seriously impact their ability to have inventory in other states, right? Especially if they move away from ICE and focus only on EVs. What is the ICE product going to look like in the non-CARB states?
They're not shipping ICE product.
Right.
Is that not
so
correct?
that's going to impact.
Right. So if you want a Dodge Hellcat or whatever, do they still make the Dodge Hellcat? I don't know. If you want the Dodge Hellcat, you won't be able to buy it because they literally will not ship it into Massachusetts.
So there's this bifurcation of the marketplace of the CARB focus versus the non-CARB focus, which, as I said earlier, the EPA is trying to push people towards.
So is this really, is the trip necessary? Oh, I'm being warned. Our time is running out. And here I was hoping to throw out some more questions. The trip toward rapidly electrifying our automobile industry, because it seems to me that it's not clear by the time you factor in all the other manufacturing we'll have to do, all the batteries, the lithium, all that other stuff. How long before we actually end up with net lower carbon by doing this, when you factor in all the additional manufacturing that will be needed to bring it up to speed? I don't know. Does anyone know?
Well, I would submit to the brainiacs of across the river at MIT to come up with that number.
Wait, you're at BU and you're talking about MIT.
Because you can see it basically from the. Well, anyway, but I would just say this, that I've said for years, we're at some point we will not have petroleum. It's a fact. We just won't. And you need to transition to alternative propulsion methods if we're going to be committed to these vehicles you can watch moving all day outside. Now, whether it's EVs, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's something else, it's never too late to take the first step towards transitioning to a future.
It looks like we have to wrap up. Does this mean we don't have time for even one question from the audience? I'm sorry, we got going so much that I didn't even take a question from the audience. Afraid not. Got to wrap it up, folks. I'm so sorry.
Well, thanks for having us.
Oh, glad to have you.
This is great.
And, that's about all the time we've got. It has been a pleasure moderating this session. I have to say that because it's written here. But it's not true. I actually enjoyed moderating the session on navigating the shift to electric vehicles. And we thank you all for taking part in Globe Summit 2023. But don't leave. There's more to come. And it'll probably be from people who are even more interesting than these guys here. So thank you very much for having us.
I just want to know where the buffet lunch is.
Thanks a lot, guys.